In the previous video, we talked about the scope of the revenue standards, both ASC 606 as well as IFRS 15, and what contracts are in scope and accounted for under the revenue standards. In this video, we're now going to move to another portion of Step 1, which focuses on combining contracts. As with all these videos, what you see on the screen is a software that we've developed at tasglobal.co. The purpose of the software is to help companies understand and implement the requirements of the standard. So moving now to combining contracts. The first question that you see says, were multiple contracts with the same customer, including its related parties, entered into at or near the same time? The idea here is that if you've entered into multiple agreements with the same party, again, or its related party, or same customer, I should say, or its related parties at or near the same time, in certain instances, then those contracts must be combined and treated as if it were a single contractual arrangement. This is similar to what currently exists under existing GAAP, so the concept is not completely overhauled, but there are some specific requirements that must be met before these contracts are required to be accounted for as a combined contract. So the first question asks if these contracts were entered into at or near the same time. As with all of these questions, you'll see a question mark to give you a simple summary of what the requirements are, as well as a I, which will give you an example of how to apply those requirements. So if you say no to this question, then you're taken to the next video or the next aspect of the revenue standards, which focus on contract modifications. But if you say yes, that there were multiple agreements entered into at or near the same time, now you're asked a series of questions here to determine if they are required to be combined under the revenue standard. So the first one asks, were the contracts negotiated as a package with a single commercial objective? In practice, this tends to be the requirement that most frequently, or the criteria that most frequently is met. And if you answer yes to this, that they were in fact negotiated as a package to obtain a single commercial objective, then the requirement is that these contracts should be combined. However, if you answer no, then you would be taken once again to the next step of, if any of the three criteria are met, then the contracts are required to be combined. So if you answer no to the first, then you're taken to the second. If you had answered yes to the first, then you've already concluded that the contracts are required to be combined. But let's say no. So let's move now. The second question that's asked is, does the consideration for any of the agreements depend on the price or performance of any of the other contracts? So if you have pricing in one contract that's linked to the performance of another contract, for example, or vice versa, then you would meet this criteria and you've already concluded that the contracts are required to be combined. If, however, you say no, then you're taken to the third criteria. The third criteria says, do the goods or services promised in the contracts represent a single performance obligation? So if the goods or services spread across multiple agreements would be combined using step 2, which we'll get to shortly, to be accounted for as a single performance obligation, then you would be required to combine the contracts and treat it as if it's a single contractual arrangement. If you answer no to all of these questions, however, then you've concluded that none of these three criteria are met, and you would move to the next step of the analysis, which focuses on contract modification. If, however, any one of these three criteria are met, then you've made the determination that these contracts were entered into at or near the same time and do meet the requirements to be combined into a single contractual arrangement. Now what that would mean as you move through the analysis, it means that you have to consider the transaction price within both contracts. You have to consider promised goods or services within both contracts. You have to treat the multiple contracts as if it was a single contractual arrangement. And the rest of the analysis from this point forward will consider all of the contracts.